In this video we're going to be looking at the analysis section of MapMate and how you can add your own customised queries to that section. So if we click on analysis, it opens up with the familiar set of subheadings showing all the standard queries that MapMate comes with. At the bottom of this list of subheadings there's a section called user queries, and on a new installation of MapMate you probably won't have very many things showing in here, but at the bottom of the list there's an option to add a new user query. The queries in MapMate are constructed using a database query language called SQL, for Structured Query Language, sometimes referred to as SQL. To set up a new query, you need to have the query laid out in that language so that the computer will understand it. But this doesn't mean that you necessarily have to learn SQL yourself. All you need to do is to get the code from somewhere else, and there are various places where you can do that, and then you can copy it into your copy of MapMate. And this video is primarily about showing you how to put that code into MapMate once you've got it. Code is available on some of the websites, including my own website that's linked from the BSBI MapMate support, and also from the MapMate user group. But before we look at how you actually install your own code, let's have a quick look at a couple of the existing queries. If we go up to the Browse Records section and look at the main Browse All Records query, if you right-click on that one, you have an option to show the SQL, and this opens up a window which, if you're not familiar with SQL, probably looks quite daunting. Lots of rather meaningless code. The main reason for looking at this SQL and for getting familiar with the way it's structured is to look for these main words that start off the two sections of this particular query. You have something called a select statement that shows you what information is going to appear in each column of the query, and a from statement which tells the database where all that information is stored. Let's try another example. We'll go back to the main query list. To see a slightly more complicated query, let's have a look at the fun stuff part of the queries and look at records per recorder. Right click on there, show SQL. This starts off in a similar way to the query we just looked at. We have a select statement that shows what columns we're going to have in the results of the query. We have the from statement that tells the database where to get the information from, but there's a couple of other ones in this particular query. Because this query is looking at the number of records per recorder, we have to group everything together by the name of each recorder. So there's a group by statement that tells the query to do that. And we also want to have it in a particular order. In this case, when the query runs, it shows the recorder with the greatest number of records at the top, and then in descending order from there. And the final statement here, order by, is telling the query to put the results in descending order of the number of records. Now, you don't need to know any of the details of how all that works, but it is worth getting used to the idea of there being these set of different statements. When you put a query into MapMate, you have to make sure that each one of these statements starts on a new line. In other words, there has to be a line break at the end of each section, but no line breaks within the section itself. Let's go back to the main query list and close up those existing queries and go back to the user queries section. So we're going to enter a new user query, and let's assume that we've been sent the relevant SQL text to go into the query. Perhaps this is something that you've been sent by somebody else on the MapMate user group, for instance. This particular query is quite a useful one. It's based on the standard Browse All Records query, but it actually shows the determiner as a separate column as well as the recorder. So this is a query we'd like to have in our copy of MapMate. The easiest way to bring this query in is first of all to go to the title and highlight the title and copy the title. If we now go back into MapMate and double click on New User Query at the bottom of the analysis section, you can now paste the title in there straight away. For some reason, when you paste a title in here, it doesn't always allow you to click on the OK button. There is no logical explanation for why it doesn't do that, but the way to get around that is just to simply type a space, which you can then get rid of again, and then the OK button will have come live and you can click on it from there. When you create a new query in MapMate, you always see this standard bit of text when the query is first opened up. This is a very short piece of SQL text, but it's not a text that we're ever going to need, so we can just delete that and leave ourselves with an empty box ready for the new text to go in. We now need to go back to the document that has the query text in it, and we can see straight away that it has a select statement and a from statement. And at the end of an SQL query there is nearly always a semicolon. So what we now need to do is to highlight the entire query from the beginning right the way through up to and including the semicolon at the end, and copy that. Back into MapMate we can now paste all that text and the query is there. It's not actually saved yet, and you do have to remember to click on the Save button, which is this rather anonymous looking yellow icon at the top of the screen. So we click on that and it asks us to confirm that that's what we want to save as the Browse All Records with Determiner query. OK. It's possible now to run the query from there, or you can go back to the query list and you should find it's now at the bottom of the user queries. When you add a new user query it always appears at the bottom of the user queries, but if you close down analysis and go back into it, it will then appear in alphabetical order underneath the user queries section. So just to prove that this query works, we can double click on it to run it, and we now have our list of records with both the recorder column and the determiner column. So that's reasonably straightforward, and as I say, you don't need to learn the SQL yourself, you just need to be able to get it from somebody who does know SQL and to be able to copy it and paste it into your copy of MapMate. The main thing that causes problems with this operation is when the line breaks don't end up in the correct places, and we'll now run through another example of adding an SQL where the line breaks need a bit more careful looking at. Back into analysis so that we can get to the new user query section, and this time we're going to look at some queries that are available on the main BSBI website. This first query is one that will show you the number of records you have in each hectad during a particular year range. As before, the first thing to do is to highlight the title and copy that. Back into MapMate, double click the new user query and paste the title, remembering to add and delete the space so that the OK button is available. The same bit of text that we saw before, which we can delete. Back to the query document, and this time we will highlight and copy up to and including the semicolon. Back into MapMate and paste that query text. And having pasted the text, we need to save it. At first glance it looks as if this query is fine and ready to go, but if you look at it closely you can see that there are in fact some extra line breaks that shouldn't be there. For instance, after this equals sign there's no space, but it jumps onto the next line. So if we put in a space and then delete the line break, the line wraps around there, and likewise on the next one we need to put in a space and delete the line break. And the where statement here also seems to finish in a slightly odd place, so we put a space in there and delete the line break. And this is now looking more like it should, with 6 separate statements, each separated by a line break. Having made those changes, we need to save the query again, and we can then run it to check that it's working. And that seems to be fine, showing the number of records in each 10 km square for the year range that we're looking at. For our final example, we'll look at the other query on the BSBI document. And this, instead of looking at numbers of records for a particular year range, looks at the number of species. In order to get a number of species, you have to summarise the records first, and to make this query work you actually need to load in 2 queries, one of which is a sub-query that is then used to build up the main query. So this main query wouldn't actually run if the subquery wasn't on your copy of MapMate, and although the subquery would run if it was on its own, it wouldn't actually tell you anything terribly useful. You do need to have both of them. The other thing about subqueries is that you have to be very careful to give them the exactly correct name that they've originally been given, because the main query will use that name to refer to the subquery, so it must be absolutely the same without any spelling differences. So as usual, we will set up the subquery by copying its title, new user query, paste, delete the text that we don't need, copy the query text from this subquery, and paste that into MapMate. Same issue with the line breaks, we could do with getting rid of a couple of them there, and one at the end. Save the query. So that's our subquery ready to go. Back to the document and copy the title for the main query. Back into MapMate, new query, paste, delete the text that you don't need, back to your query, copy the query text for the main query, back into MapMate and paste that text. And there's just one line break we need to look out for at the beginning here. Save that query and OK it, and we should now be able to run this query. And this time what we're seeing is the number of species per 10 kilometre square rather than the number of records which we saw in the previous query. So as you can see, it's quite quick and easy to add new queries to MapMate, providing that you do have the SQL ready to go in the first place. And as we mentioned at the beginning of this video, there are various places where you can get the SQL from existing websites or from asking for help on the MapMate user group. Links for all these are available on the BSBI MapMate support website.